groups. This is part and parcel right out of Gilovich's chapter 12. It's chapter 9 in Arnett. No, that's not Arnett. Aronson. I'm trying to remember which textbook I'm using. Okay, so yeah, it's chapter 9 in Aronson. It's chapter 12 in Gilovich. Everything in this lecture is in chapter 12 in Gilovich. So there you go. Let's go ahead and get started. Group processes influence in social groups. So what is a group? A group is two or more people who interact with and influence one another and in so doing consider themselves as a group. This is really kind of interesting because right now I'm reading a book called Digital Madness that talks about how we are changing what groups look like. Of course, you can see all these individuals are together, but we also have online groups, and the online groups are really kind of fascinating because they don't ever see each other. Sometimes they will Zoom or Duo or what else did they call it? Anyway, yeah, they will see each other's faces, but they don't really interact physically, which is kind of interesting, and it's changing the dynamic of the world because of all these online groups. It's polarizing people. It's radicalizing people. It's just fascinating stuff. The human brain is adapted to maintain cohesion in groups up to about 150 people, and actually we have shown the same thing in Facebook and Instagram. Most people can actually maintain contact with. They may have millions and millions of followers, but the number of people that they're actually interacting with, the individuals that they are accepting information from, is fairly limited, and 150 is about it. Most groups contain less than 4 people. Groups normally last for an extended length of time, but as in the case of fans at an athletic event, it may only be for a few moments. And of course, that's a soccer game in Spain. Social psychologists feel that groups exist because people need to feel a sense of belonging to many of the things that they do. And this is known as affiliation. This is, of course, the Aryan nation. And the only reason I show you that is because these people are out there as well. The negative people. One of the oldest concepts, and it seems to be accelerating. It seems to be growing. Just last weekend, a terrorist organization in Palestine, in Gaza, attacked the Israelis. I mean, en masse, and now they're retaliating. How in the world did they ever do this? And the answer is probably through social media. And actually, they're saying that it wasn't through social media because it was a sneak attack. So, crazy stuff. One of the oldest concepts in social psychology is that people perform better and faster when in the presence of other people, and this is known as social facilitation. The first social psychology experiment was done on social facilitation. It had to do with winding up what were they doing? They were competing against each other with a rod and reel. They were reeling up fishing line, and they were timing them, and so they timed them when they were all by themselves, and then they put them in competition with one another. What they found out was that people went faster when they were competing against somebody else. They told them to always reel as fast as you can, but they they went faster when they were competing against somebody else. When my wife was stationed in Japan, I didn't have very much to do because I couldn't find a job. Anyway, so I was running every day, and I would time myself, and every day I was getting a little bit fast, just a little bit faster. I was competing against myself, and I would improve my time by a second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds. So every day I was going just a little bit faster, just a little bit faster. Well, one day when I was running, there was a guy in front of me, and he was tall and slender, and he looked like he knew how to run, and he wasn't going faster than I was. So, I slowly caught him. It was a loop, and you would run out, and then you'd run back on the same track, on the same. It was a road. So you would run out on the road, then you'd run back on the same road. And so by the time we got to the turnaround point, I was just right behind him. And when he realized that we were running together and that it was kind of like a competition, he sped up. Well, I did too. I sped up, and I stayed right behind him. And he got faster, and I got faster, and he got faster, and I got faster. And I was a little surprised. Usually, this is competition. The faster you run, the more tired you get. But I wasn't getting tired at all. I was feeling pretty good, and we got to. There was one point where you went off into family housing, and he went back to the gym, and it was about, I don't know, about a quarter mile from the finish line, from the three mile mark. And right about there, I kind of passed him a little bit, and I'm, zipping along. I've got about a quarter of a mile to go in family housing, and I'm running along, and I'm feeling really, really good. And I get to the finish line and hit my stopwatch, and I looked at my watch. I had gone 25 seconds faster than I'd ever gone before. And it had to do with social facilitation. It had to do with the fact that I was competing against that other individual, and I didn't feel tired at all. I was barely winded. It was really kind of odd. The concept of social facilitation not only includes athletic events, of course, but also is present in all species and most activities, including sexual activities among breeding pairs of rats. And we won't go into how rats breed, but they do. There is a competition involved. Marriage doesn't exist among rats. However, social facilitation does not always take place. In fact, with more complex activities, the presence of others actually tends to hinder performance. So the more complex the activity, the less likely social facilitation will take place. The simpler the activity, such as running, the more likely that it will take place. According to work by Robert Zients, the anxiety caused by the presence of others inhibits complex tasks, but it facilitates simple tasks. Athletes tend to be more energized when they are given support. For this reason, home field advantage is very important since the athletes are more likely to be supported in their own territory. This is no truer in any sport than soccer, where almost 70% of the games are won by the home team. And this is looking at the professional soccer players. And this is one of the reasons why, if you know anything about soccer, you know about the Premier League. Premier League, if you win at somebody else's place, you get an extra point. If it's a road win, you get an extra point. Because the home team is expected to win. While individuals tend to gain comfort from being around other people, too many people tend to have the opposite effect. When people are crammed in shoulder to shoulder, they tend to have the same reactions. Close together, people tend to have a higher pulse rate and higher blood pressure. And if you've ever been in a crowded situation, you try to keep a seat between you and somebody you don't know. And the closer you are to people that you don't know, the higher your pulse rate and the higher your blood pressure. Nicholas Cottrell feels that the reason individuals perform differently when people are watching is because the individual is concerned about how others are evaluating them. Researchers have discovered that people perform better when their co-actor is slightly superior. Arousal decreases when a high status group is diluted with people the performer doesn't care about. People who worry about evaluations are the ones most affected by their presence. Social pressure is the most intense when people are unfamiliar and hard to keep an eye on. And of course, each of these statements has to do with different research that has been done looking at these aspects. Researchers have found that when a performer is distracted, they are more aroused, whether the distraction is human or not. Robert Zients has shown that people react to the presence of another person, whether they're evaluating or not. Joggers are energized when running with someone else, no matter how good they are. So we tend to be aroused in crowds. Researchers have discovered that when people are working on a group project, people tend to exert less effort toward a common goal than if people are being held accountable individually. And this is known as social loafing. John Sweeney refers to the people benefiting from social loafing as free riders, individuals who benefit from the group but give little effort in return. And this is one of the reasons why I don't do group projects. I know there are a lot of instructors that do use group projects, but I feel that the social loafing and the free riders, it really isn't fair to the people that are doing all the work. One of the downfalls of communism was the prevalence of social loafing. With no impetus to stick out and no incentive to improve, production in communist countries stagnated. While in private production of agriculture, the people outstripped themselves and their neighbors when allowed to grow their own food on less land. People will still watch public television, though they refuse to contribute money to it. And of course, that has become a real issue since Congress took away the funding for public television and public radio. On challenging tasks, when an individual perceives their portion of the work as indispensable, they work harder. They also work harder when they consider other individuals in their group as unreliable. An individual will work harder when their performance will bring select rewards, as with stock options. And this is one of the reasons why some of the most successful companies are those that give stock options to their employees. People tend to loaf less when the other members of their group are considered friends rather than strangers. People in collectivist cultures social loaf less than people in individualistic cultures. Women who tend to be less individualistic than men social loaf less than men do. So there you go. Men are natural social loafers, I guess. People are more likely to work hard when there are challenging objectives. They are rewarded for group success. There is a spirit of commitment to the team. Okay, now we're going to talk about Zimbardo's famous Stanford prison study. Okay, Zimbardo was working at Stanford University. He was a psychology professor, brand new psychology professor at Stanford University. He decided that he was going to do an experiment. He was going to take some of his best and his brightest students, and he was going to create a mock prison. And he would observe how these individuals interacted. He was going to do it for about 2 weeks. So he set this whole thing up. It's really kind of interesting. He set this whole thing up with the administration at Stanford University. He had all these individuals that were going to be role playing, all these students He chose them randomly, whether they would be prison guards or whether they would be prisoners. The guards were outfitted with a uniform of khaki shirts and pants, a whistle, a police nightstick, and reflecting sunglasses. And the prisoners were outfitted with a loose-fitting smock with an identification number stamped on it, rubber sandals, a cap made from a nylon stocking, and a locked chain attached to one ankle. Okay, so there wasn't really any, they weren't really stuck. The experiment started with the prisoners being rounded up by arresting them on campus, handcuffing them, and bringing them to the makeshift jail. So it was a mock arrest. The experiment was supposed to last for 2 weeks. The study was to see if they could get these elite college students to start acting like prisoners and guards. You got to remember, these are the best and the brightest. These are the best students in the psychology program. These are kids with relatively high IQs. This is Stanford University, one of the elite schools in the country. The experiment was way too successful as the students quickly adopted their roles. The experiment had to be ended in only 6 days, and there was a reason why it ended. The guards were very creative in abuse, verbally harassing and humiliating the prisoners. Torture was not unknown, and the warden, who was Zimbardo himself, watched and tacitly approved. Nudity was used to humiliate. They even changed guards, and those guards immediately slipped into the same roles. Now, this is really bizarre because Zimbardo, who was theoretically the prison warden, missed all of this stuff, and people were starting to suffer. Everybody was starting to suffer, but especially the prisoners were starting to suffer. They were going into depression. Yeah, okay, I'm going to talk about this right now. The prisoners almost immediately took on the role of someone without hope. They became passive, they became helpless, they became withdrawn. Some prisoners became so anxious and depressed that they had to be released early to save their sanity. Now remember, these are the best and brightest. They know that this is a mock-up. Why are they reacting so negatively to what's going on? Other prisoners planned escapes in retaliation against the guards. Okay, so why did it end? It ended after only 6 days, and the reason it ended after only 6 days was because the prisoners were starting to suffer, and the prison guards were starting to become more and more cruel, and they were really fitting into their roles. And Zimbardo didn't see it. Zimbardo thought that this was just a mock-up. He wanted to see how it ended up, how it turned out, but he didn't see how negative things were turning. So what happened was, at the time, he was dating a graduate student, and the graduate student came in to see how his experiment was coming along, and she told him, look, Phil, you got to stop this right now because some of these people are really suffering. And at that point, of course, she kind of slapped him in the. She didn't really hit him, but it was a wake up call for Zimbardo, who was missing the whole thing, and that's when he stopped it. He stopped it because of his graduate student. And wait a minute, one of these two individuals is the graduate student. I'm not sure which one. Anyway, okay. So we know that this happens, and this happens if this happened with one of the more elite in one of the more elite schools in the country. So what happens when it's actual prisoners and actual prison guards? Well, in 2004, American military guards routinely abused prisoners in Abu Ghraib, a prison in Iraq. Physical beating, sexual abuse, and psychological humiliation were some of the things that they did. The American public was shocked by the pictures of these abuses. A few bad apples happened to end up in the unit regarding the prisoner, but that wasn't it. What's bad is the barrel, according to Zimbardo. It ain't the guards, it's the whole process of imprisoning people. So it's not bad apples, it's the barrel. And here are some of the pictures of of Abu Ghraib, and of course we're Americans. We're nice people. We don't do these kinds of things. Here she is treating this naked man like a dog. This is a female guard, by the way. And of course he's naked, and they're threatening him with a dog to bite his genitals off. There she is back here with her human dog. And there she is again. All these men are naked, and of course, homosexuality in the Muslim world is not something that is acceptable. And here they had these men piling on top of each other naked, and she's just laughing like a goofy person. Covered him with, that's human feces, by the way. Okay, so yeah, it can't happen here, and the problem is the prison, not the people. But of course, they were all let go. These were all National Guard police MPs. Group cohesiveness are the qualities of a group that bind members together and promote liking between members. Group cohesiveness. The more cohesive a group is, the more its members are likely to stay in the group, take part in group activities, and try to recruit new like-minded members. And we're looking for people that are like us, and that's how groups stay together. And this is one of the things that we're noticing with online organizations, and some of them are really bizarre. As a matter of fact, I was reading about a group called Involuntary Celibates, and these are men. Actually, it started out. It was put together by a woman, and her idea was that we needed. There are people that have difficulty dating, and they have difficulty. They've never had any sex partners, and they don't understand, and they're kind of awkward. We need to get these people together, so that they can talk about their difficulties, and that's how the involuntary celibacy started. But it morphed into this monstrous group of misogynistic men who hate women, and they hate the men that the women like. And we've had 8 incidences of these individuals killing not only women, but killing men and women. That the women who won't have sex with them, and the men that these women are attracted to. Weird stuff, and it's all over the internet. We have the Aryan Nation. There's all kinds of negative things. That's how ISIS was able to accumulate masses of soldiers coming into Syria by recruiting them online. If task requires close cooperation, cohesiveness helps performance. Cohesiveness can interfere with optimal performance. An example is how Kennedy and his administration dealt with the Bay of Pigs incident. Because the incident happened at the beginning of Kennedy's administration, and the people around Kennedy were a tightly knit group, no one argued against Kennedy's decision to allow them to try to liberate Cuba. And this was in 1961. Now, of course, I remember this because I was around in 1961. I was 12 at the time. And I thought at the time, well, this is kind of a strange idea. Why in the world would they do this? But they were the wealthy people of Cuba. Fidel Castro had taken over in 1959. He had taken over Cuba in 1959. And at first, no one was quite sure what kind of a government he would set up. But eventually, he set up a communist government, and people were upset. They were real upset about it, especially in the United States, where we were trying to face off communism around the world. And so Kennedy allowed, So the people that didn't want to be part of his government, didn't want to be part of the Cuban government, left. Most of them went to Miami. Most of them went to the United States. They went to the southern part of the United States. Cuba's nice and warm. It's near the equator, so it's a nice and warm place. So they decided that they needed to go to a nice warm place. A lot of them went to the southern Florida, and that's where they amassed all of these men and arms, and it was backed by the CIA. As a matter of fact, the CIA gave them air cover in the beginning. Once they realized that everything was going south, and they pulled the air cover, and at that point, of course, there was no way that the Bay of Pigs invaders could win. Group members tend to be alike in age, sex, beliefs, race, ethnicity, and opinions. Why are they so similar? They are attracted to and likely to recruit similar others. The groups operate in ways that encourage similarity in the members. Homogeneous groups are more cohesive. Diverse groups perform better than homogeneous groups. Homogeneous groups tend to become extreme, but diverse groups tend to stay with their original ideas. Homogeneous groups tend to morph, they tend to evolve into something else, like with the incel movement, the involuntary celibacy movement. Just bizarre stuff. Started out by a woman, potentially it started out with a woman was talking about it. There was the whole negative thing came out of this guy in Santa Barbara, California. Just really strange stuff. Incel, and like I said, there have been 8 mass shootings or mass killings by these incel members. To examine the relationship between a business's performance and its racial and gender diversity, Herring in 2009 conducted a correlational study of over 1,000 U.S. workplaces and found a positive association between both types of diversity with sales revenue and number of customers. These results seem to indicate a positive relationship between diversity and a business's bottom line. But as you know, because these data are only correlational, we cannot draw conclusions here regarding one variable causing another. So the more diverse the population, the more likely that they will be successful. This is really kind of interesting. And we're going to talk more about that in cultural psychology. Large groups can also lead to some pretty horrendous behavior among people. During World War II, Japanese troops systematically raped and murdered 400,000 Chinese civilians in Nanking over a 2-week period after the surrender of the city. And this is a picture of a Japanese officer about to behead that individual. Yeah, we won't look at that. During the German genocide of the European Jewish population, the systematic murder of the population progressed from shooting and burying to gassing and burning because there were so many of them. Ugly stuff. People perform in groups what they would not have the social support to do alone because of de-individuation. De-individuation is a loss of self-awareness and evaluation apprehension. It occurs in group situations that foster responsiveness to group norms, good or bad. A group has the power not only to arouse its members, but also to render them unidentifiable. It is this group's action, it's the group's action, not the individual's action, and that is part of de-individuation. Brian Mullen in 1986 content analyzed newspaper accounts of 60 lynchings committed in the United States between 1899 and 1946 and discovered an interesting fact. The more people there were in the mob, the greater the savagery and viciousness with which they killed their victims. Something else had happened. We're talking about bystander effect. The more people around, the less likely anybody will help. That just keeps playing out in the United States. And not only that, but we're getting video. People are videotaping instead of helping. People are videotaping whatever's going on. There was a case in 2021. There was a case on a subway train in Philadelphia, and this homeless man just kept harassing this lady, kept harassing her and kept harassing her. The car, there were people in the car, and they didn't do anything about it. They didn't do anything. And for an hour, this guy harassed this lady. Finally, in the end, he raped her. He raped this woman, and it took him, well, rape isn't instantaneous. It took him 6 minutes to consummate the rape, and nobody did anything. Finally, somebody came on board, saw that there was a problem, and they called the police. But for an hour, these, well, it was different people getting on and getting off the train and getting them onto the train. But all these individuals that were in that car saw what was going on, and nobody did anything about it. And he harassed her for an hour. She was drunk when she got on the train, and I I guess they assumed that it's okay to sexually molest and harass a drunk person. Anyway, that's what happened. As ugly as that is. Why are we talking about that? Hmm. We were talking about bystander effect. Similarly, Robert Watson in 1973 studied 24 cultures and found that warriors who hid their identities before going into battle, for example, by using face and body paint, were significantly more likely to kill, torture, or mutilate captive prisoners than warriors who did not hide their identities. And of course, this is a Greek helmet. This is a Japanese helmet that hide your face. This hides your face. And there you go. The guards all had reflecting glasses, so you couldn't see their eyes. The same thing was going on with those guys. You couldn't see their eyes, so that was okay. So they were hiding their identity, and they felt more impervious to do whatever they wanted to do. The robes and hoods of the Ku Klux Klan cloak its members in anonymity. Their violent behavior is consistent with research on de-individuation. I mean, we can see all these individuals. Why do they have these ideas? Well, they can have these ideas because they're hiding behind these robes, and it's the same way with social media. I mean, we don't identify ourselves; nobody knows who we are, so we can say all the most god awful things we want. Lynch mobs lynch with impunity. Rioters in a faceless mob loot. Large crowds of people around a suicide jumper will bait and jeer them to jump. People in crowded cities are more likely to loot and vandalize than people in small, less crowded cities where it's more likely that people know who they are. De-individuation does not require face-to-face contact, i.e. feeling less inhibited on social media. That's anonymous, and this is part of the problem with social media. We don't have names. We don't want anybody to know who we are, and then we can say anything we want. Cyberspace provides advantages for the free and open discussion of difficult topics, but the cost seems to be a reduction in common civility. And of course, this is something that we're seeing over and over and over again, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. The phenomenon of the internet troll is a modern example of de-individuation made possible by the feelings of anonymity that often go along with being online. In January of 2006, the Washington Post had to temporarily shut down its website post.blog after the site was deluged with postings from angry readers, many of whom wrote obscene or insulting comments. The flap was over the claim by a Washington Post reporter that admitted felon Jack Abramoff had made substantial campaign contributions to both parties. The Post later published a correction, noting that Abramoff had contributed mostly to the Republican Party, but not before their website was flooded with responses not fit for a family newspaper. And you, I'm sure you don't remember Jack Abramoff, but yeah, it was a big deal in 2006. That's almost 20 years ago. Groups will do well only if the most talented members can convince the others that he or she is right, which is not always easy, given that many of us bear a strong resemblance to mules when it comes to admitting we are wrong. You undoubtedly know what it's like to try to convince a group to follow your idea, be faced with opposition and disbelief, and then have to sit there and watch the group make the wrong decision. And this has happened to me over and over and over again. Process loss is any aspect of group interaction that inhibits good problem solving. In some groups, people don't listen to each other. One person is allowed to dominate the discussion while the others tune out. Process loss can occur for a number of reasons. Groups might not try hard enough to find out who the most competent member is. The most competent member might find it difficult to disagree with everyone else. Communication problems can arise, and this is part of, and there's a lot of problems with groups, but this is the most, this is one of the more severe problems, process loss. Groups tend to focus on the information they share and ignore facts known to only some members of the group. Subsequent research is focused on ways to get groups to focus more on unshared information. Group discussion should last long enough to get beyond what everyone already knows. Assign different group members to specific areas of expertise so that they know that they alone are responsible for certain types of information. Transactive memory is the combined memory of two people that is more efficient than the memory of either individual. By learning to specialize their memories and knowing what their partner is responsible for, couples often do quite well in remembering important information. The same can be true of groups of strangers if they develop a system whereby different people are responsible for remembering different parts of a task. Groupthink is a kind of thinking in which maintaining group cohesiveness and solidarity is more important than considering the facts in a realistic manner. Groupthink is most likely to occur when the group is highly cohesive, isolated from contrary opinions, ruled by a directive leader who makes his or her wishes known. And of course, we see groupthink in politics constantly, and it may be taking place now with the problems they're having in Congress, especially the House of Representatives, where they don't have a speaker right now because he was fired by the Republican majority. He was fired, and now they have to select another leader. But they have a very slim majority, so nobody can. They have to get almost unanimity in order to elect a speaker. Now, why is the speaker important? The speaker in the House of Representatives is important because he's the one that sets the agenda. He or she, they are the ones that set the agenda. They are the ones that determine what laws they're going to look at or what information that they're going to look at. And they are also the number three, the third person in line for the presidency of the United States. So if the president dies and the vice president dies, then the Speaker of the House becomes the president of the United States. This has never happened, but you just never know. And this is one of the reasons why the president and the vice president never travel together. They can't travel together because in case there is an accident of one kind or another, some tragedy would occur. The president and the vice president rarely are actually seen together, and this is because the vice president is. They try to keep the president and vice president away from each other so that if something happens to the president, the vice president will be available. So we're talking about groupthink. And wait a minute, why did I give you a politics lesson? Anyway, okay, so there's a lot of groupthink taking place in Congress right now. Strange things are happening. Um, the Republican Party won't condemn Donald Trump because he's too popular. George Santos seemingly has lied and gotten his seat in a negative manner, but instead of punishing him, the Congress is just ignoring it, mainly because they don't have very much of they have only have a four-person majority or something like that, five-person majority. While more authoritarian governments commonly participate in groupthink, occurrences in the American history include Pearl Harbor, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Vietnam War, and Watergate. And I'm going to talk more about all of these in just a moment. Now, all of these are, well, I wasn't around when Pearl Harbor happened, but I was very much involved with, Bay of Pigs was in 61. I was only 12. But I was in the war in Vietnam. And of course, Watergate occurred when I was in the military. I think it was. Anyway. Okay, the Bay of Pigs, as I've already explained to you, Castro took over in Cuba in 1959. Um, to so, the person that he threw out of power was a fairly corrupt individual, and everybody knew that. We didn't like him. We didn't like him. Nobody really liked him very much because he was a dictator. So when he left, everybody was pretty happy. But the no one was exactly sure who Castro was. Would he become more democratic? Would he be because what was happening before, it was pretty much a dictatorship. It was an oligarchy in essence. Rich people in Cuba were controlling everything. It was almost a gambler's mecca. At the time in 1959, there was no gambling in the United States. So if you wanted to gamble, then you went down to Havana to gamble because gambling was legal. There were criminal organizations had taken over the government, and they had allowed a leader to take over that would do whatever they wanted to do. So Castro taking over the Cuban government was not a negative thing. It was not. It was seen as not a negative thing. But then when Castro declared that he was going to create a communist government, of course, the United States balked. Not only did they balk, but the emigres, the people that had left Cuba, were really upset and decided that they would go in and they would take over. They would take over Cuba. They would, and we backed them. And the decision to back them was Kennedy's decision. Kennedy decided, yeah, we can't have a communist government 60 miles from the American shores. So we need to overthrow the communist government in Cuba. So he allowed the Bay of Pigs to occur. He allowed these immigrants to go in there. The idea was that they would start a revolution. The people who hate, of course, everybody hates communism. They will overthrow the government and we'll put a better government in place. That was the idea. So who were the people saying, this may not be the best idea in the world, John, Jack? This may not be the best idea in the world. Maybe we need to not support this idea. And the reason they didn't is because he was a new president. He had surrounded himself by yes men, and nobody argued with him. And he came up with a decision, and it turned out to be a terrible, terrible mistake. Watergate. This was in 1972. Um, Richard Nixon was running for a second term as president. The people around him decided that the Democrats were not good people. Therefore, the Republicans needed to maintain power any way they possibly could. So what Nixon and his minions decided to do was to put a bug in the Democratic headquarters so they could find out what was going on with the Democrats. So they broke into the Democratic headquarters and they put a bug in the telephones so that they could hear what was going on, so that they knew what was going to happen. And something happened to the bug, and they needed to go in and they needed to repair it. And that's when uh, and the Democratic headquarters were in Watergate. Watergate was a housing development in Washington D.C., and they got caught. And of course, there was a lot of fallout. But instead of saying, "Yeah, we did it, doggone it, I'm sorry, we won't do that kind of stuff again. That was a mistake." They tried to cover it up. They tried to cover it up, and they tried to hedge, and they wouldn't admit that they made a mistake, and that's what was going on with Watergate. And Nixon lost his presidency because of it. He was almost impeached, but Republican senators came in and convinced him to resign instead of allowing himself to be impeached, because he definitely would have been. Iran-Contra affair, what had happened was this had to do with Nicaragua and Iran. Iran was fighting a war against Iraq, and they needed arms and ammunition. Well, what had happened in Iran was that during the Carter administration, Iran was an American ally for the longest time, and in 1980, Iran, or 1979, the Iranians had a Islamic revolution, and they threw out the ruler, who was the Shah of Iran. They threw him out, and they took over. This revolutionary government took over. And so, about that time, Iraq started fighting against Iran. They started a war over oil rights that was on the Iran-Iraq border. So this war started, and of course it went on and on and on and on, and they were running out of the Iran was running out of equipment. At the same time, Nicaragua was taken over by a Marxist government. Nicaragua, down in Central America, they were taken over by a Marxist government. And Reagan was president, and Reagan didn't like that. He wanted the Marxist government to be overthrown. So a group started in Guatemala called the Contra. Contra means against in Spanish. And so the Contra were freedom fighters, as it were. They were terrorists. They were fighting against the Nicaraguan government. And Reagan wanted to back them, but of course it's illegal for a government to back a terrorist organization, or what he called freedom fighters, what Reagan called freedom fighters. So Congress passed a law that he couldn't give any money to the Contras. Okay. So this is Oliver North, and Oliver North was a Marine lieutenant colonel, and he came up with this plan where he would sell surplus equipment to the Iranians. Most of the Iranian equipment was American, because we had supplied them before they overthrew the government. Before the government was overthrown, they had all American equipment. Well, they needed new equipment. They needed spare parts. Mostly it was spare parts to fix their old equipment. Um, to fix their old equipment. So what happened was Oliver North went in and said, "Hey, look, you give us this amount of money for all this old equipment that's just that will probably just salvage anyway, and pay us all this money, and everybody would be happy." So Iran did this. This was all a secret operation, by the way. So then Oliver North took the money that he got from Iran, and he gave it to the Contras to keep the war going in Nicaragua. Well, all of this was secret. It was uh, it was something that Reagan wanted to happen, but it was illegal because Congress had told them they couldn't give any money to the Contras. And they did give money to the Contras, and the money that they gave to the Contras came from Iran. So that was the Iran-Contra affair. It probably should have ended Reagan's presidency, but it didn't. He was a very popular president, and Oliver North, of course, became an iconic figure for the extreme right wing of the American politics, as weird as that is. The Clinton-Lewinsky affair was something kind of interesting. Bill Clinton was having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. She was 21. He was somewhere in his 40s, late 40s, I think, and they were having an affair. Were having an affair in the White House, and of course he was married to Hillary Clinton at the time. And things weren't going very well for as far as Bill was concerned, it was just a dalliance. As far as Lewinsky was concerned, she thought, she's a 21-year-old woman, so she's got ideas of her own. She wasn't happy about it, so she started talking to one of her neighbors. This is Linda Tripp. Linda Tripp was a neighbor. Well, she was also a Republican operative, and so Linda Tripp started recording the conversations that she was having with Monica Lewinsky, which is illegal in Washington, in the District of Columbia, as it turns out. And so then they asked Clinton if he was having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. He said he wasn't, which wasn't true. And of course, he perjured himself. So they tried to impeach him over Monica Lewinsky. And the deal was the tapes that Linda Tripp had. And so it was really kind of interesting because this is the way that Linda Tripp looked before she started testifying, and then they dolled her all up in order to make her look more believable. You're more likely to believe a woman that looks good than a woman that, anyway. And as it turned out, he was not impeached. Okay. But groupthink, he probably could have. The whole thing blew up, and he was impeached because he wouldn't admit that he made a mistake, that he had done it actually, and it was groupthink. People were telling, "Oh, Bill, just deny it, just deny it, just deny it." And actually, we had a president. Donald Trump, would not admit anything, and still he's been indicted 4 times, and he still won't admit that he did anything wrong. As weird as that is. One symptom of groupthink is an illusion of invulnerability, causing group members to overestimate their group's might and right. The captain of the Titanic had once said God himself could not sink this ship. On April 14th, 1912, while still on the ship's first voyage, the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank. Only 711 out of 2,224 people on board survived. Another symptom is an unquestioned belief in the group's morality, which also leads to overestimation of power. During the Watergate cover-up, Nixon and his advisors had several opportunities to admit their collusion, but just kept trying to hide their deeds. Eventually, Nixon resigned, and 7 of his advisors went to prison, and these are 6 of the 7 that went to prison. The group tends to discount challenges by collectively rationalizing their decisions. When talking about escalating the Vietnam War, President Johnson held weekly Tuesday lunches discussing the war. Rather than talking about why, the meeting was mostly used to justify and explain the war. The Tuesday meetings turned into rationalization sessions for the Johnson administration, and the war went on until 1975. Johnson was president after the assassination of John Kennedy in 1963. He was president until 1968. So if they had possibly talked about what was going on in Vietnam, maybe the war wouldn't have gone on for about 10 years, 10 or 11 years. The group tends to stereotype their opponent as weak and unintelligent and incapable of legitimate retaliation. The Cuban immigrants who led the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 convinced JFK that the Cuban military was weak and ill-equipped. They also argued that popular support in Cuba would be so great that there would be a general uprising. The invasion collapsed in 2 days. And there you go. Pressures toward uniformity, conformity, pressures within the group by using ridicule and not allowing argument. Self-censorship is practiced by members to prevent ridicule. During the preparation for the Challenger flight, Thiokol engineer George McDonald wanted to postpone the flight. But instead of clearly stating, I recommend we don't launch below 53 degrees, he offered an equivocal opinion. He suggested that lower temperatures are in the direction of badness for both O-rings. What did he think they should do? From his tempered words, it's hard to tell. And of course, the Challenger blew up because the O-rings were frozen and they couldn't hold the fuel. Because there is little opposition within the group, there is an illusion of unanimity. Nobody knows what they're thinking. The group tends to protect the group from the information that would call into question the effectiveness of morality of their decision. These are known as mind guards. This is Pat Buchanan. I think he has died. That's Rush Limbaugh. He has died. And that's, of course, what is his name? Tucker Carlson. And he has been fired by Fox. And of course, that's what the conservative right has always had, mouthpieces that maintain, that are mind guards, that tell people what to think. And of course, that's the way it works. A wise leader can take several steps to avoid groupthink, remain impartial, seek outside opinions, create subgroups, seek anonymous opinions. A study by L.H. Chin in 2000 showed the death rates nearly doubled for 16 to 17-year-old drivers when they had 2 passengers rather than none. Were they more willing to take chances when others were egging them on and there was someone to show off for? And of course, that is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Fortunately, President Kennedy learned from his mistakes with the Bay of Pigs decision, and when he encountered his next major foreign policy decision, the Cuban Missile Crisis, he took many of these steps to avoid groupthink. When his advisors met to decide what to do about the discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba, Kennedy often absented himself from the group so as not to inhibit discussion. Kennedy brought in outside experts, for example, Adlai A. Stevenson, who were not members of the in-group. That Kennedy successfully negotiated the removal of Soviet missiles was almost certainly due to the improved methods of decision-making that he adopted over what he had done with Bay of Pigs. In 1961, James Stoner discovered that despite common knowledge that group behavior is more conservative than individual leadership, studies show that the opposite was true. Behind the anonymity of a group decision, committees were more likely to try risky behavior. And this is referred to as risky shift phenomenon. Groups committees tend to enhance pre-existing tendencies, strengthen the member's average tendency rather than split within the group. And this is known as group polarization. This is one reason why hung juries are so rare. Deliberation tends to lead to group polarization. However, research also shows that people who hold strong opinions before deliberating maintain these opinions even stronger after deliberation. Group polarization is evident on college campuses where different fraternities maintain select reputations that tend to attract and polarize their members, while independents are more likely to be less polarized and more liberal. Delinquency is more likely where there are like-minded youth and, in fact, will increase at a greater level than the sum of its members to show off for the other members. Terrorism does not spontaneously erupt, but is the result of like-minded people who evolve into violence. Great person theory purports that certain key personality traits make a person a good leader, regardless of the situation. A critical question is, what is the role of the leader in the group decision making? The question of what makes a great leader has intrigued psychologists, historians, and political scientists for some time. And this is a statement by John Quincy Adams. And I am a direct descendant of John Quincy Adams, by the way, except I have hair. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. Personality and leadership abilities are weakly related. Compared to non-leaders, leaders tend to be slightly more intelligent, extroverted, confident, and charismatic. Surprisingly, few personality characteristics correlate strongly with leadership effectiveness. Simonton in 1987 and then again in 2001 correlated all the factors of effective U.S. presidents and found three significant variables: being tall, coming from a small family, and number of books published before election. This is Jamie Madison. He's the shortest president at 5'3". Abraham Lincoln was the tallest president at 6'4.5". I think he is taller than Trump, though Trump probably won't admit it. There are two basic styles of leadership: transactional leaders, leaders who set clear, short-term goals and reward people who meet them. Transactional leaders do a good job of making sure the needs of the organization are met and that things run smoothly. And I have a picture. This is Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy decided that he was going to purge the American government of communists. So in the 1950s, he was a senator from Wisconsin, and he went into Congress and he made people take a pledge that they weren't communists. And then he went to Hollywood and he did the same thing with the directors and the owners and the actors in Hollywood, and it became a huge conflictual situation. And then he went into the military, and when he tangled with the Army, he lost his power because the Army said, we have already pledged our loyalty to the Constitution. We're not going to pledge our loyalty to you. Ooh. Okay, so we have transactional leaders, and we also have transformational leaders. Leaders who inspire followers to focus on common long-term goals. It is transformational leaders, however, who think outside the box, identify important long-term goals, and inspire their followers to toil hard to meet these goals. And of course, these are examples of transformational leaders: Benjamin Franklin, Henry Ford, Bill Gates, Jesus, Joan of Arc, and Walt Disney. Leadership effectiveness depends both on how task-oriented or relationship-oriented the leader is, and on the amount of control and influence the leader has over the group. Contingency theory of leadership is the idea that leadership effectiveness depends both on how task-oriented or relationship-oriented the leader is, and on the amount of control and influence the leader has over the group. This theory was developed by the IO psychologist Fred Fiedler. Now this is interesting because I'm married to a woman who was a leader in she's an Air Force, she's a retired Air Force colonel, and while she was in the military, and actually she just called me on the phone. Just a second. Hello? Okay. All right. Okay, bye. She wanted to tell me she's leaving the commissary. Okay, so I'm married to this retired Air Force colonel, and she was a hospital administrator. And what happened was that what happened was that the Air Force would send her into hospitals that were messed up, that things had happened. And what normally was going on, the individual that she was going in to replace was somebody who was a task-oriented leader. And because they were a task-oriented leader, they had alienated the work crew, the doctors and the nurses and whatnot. And Karen was a relationship oriented leader. So she would go in and she would smooth everything over and she would clean the place up. She would, get rid of all the people that wanted to just boss people around. And that was her job in the military, was cleaning up after all these task oriented leaders. And she was very good at it. And at one point, at the end of her career, they were trying to decide who they would put in charge of her organization. She was a medical um, administrator, and they chose somebody. They chose the other person because the other person was task oriented, and it's easier to look at somebody and see how dynamic they are if they're task oriented. And so the next thing that happened was 9/11 occurred. Didn't have anything to do with this, of course. But the Air Force needed hospitals after that. And of course, the person that took over was task oriented and was more interested in politicking than in the hospitals. It got a little strange after that. Anyway, she was a good leader. And that's the reason I married her, because she's such a good leader. The contingency theory of leadership has been supported in studies of numerous types of leaders, including business managers, college administrators, military commanders, and postmasters. Two basic types: task-oriented leader, a leader concerned more with getting the job done than with workers' feelings and relationships, and relationship-oriented leader, a leader who was concerned primarily with workers' feelings and relationships. Task-oriented leaders are more effective in high-control work situations. Leader-subordinate relationships are excellent. The work is structured and well-defined. Low-control work situations, leader-subordinate relationships are poor. The work needed to be done is not clearly defined. And of course, they are much better as long as everybody knows what they're supposed to do. Relationship-oriented leaders are most effective in moderate control work situations where the work goes fairly smoothly. In a hospital situation, of course, everybody wants to make sure nobody dies. And doctors and nurses and ancillary personnel just want to get the job done. So a task-oriented leader in that kind of a situation doesn't work very well because they're always bossing people around and telling them what to do. Well, normally doctors and nurses and ancillary personnel know what to do. They just need somebody to take over the administration part of it. And of course, that's what my wife did, and that's why she was so successful. Um, some attention to poor relationships and hurt feelings is needed, and that's what was going on. Uh, when a task-oriented leader has alienated his workforce, and that's actually what she was doing. Um, I'm trying to think how many times this happened to her. Uh, she went to Germany, then she came back to Offutt. Oh no, she was working in at headquarters. Then she went out to California, to Riverside, California, to clean things up. Then she went to, then she came back to Offutt. Why did she come back to Offutt? And then she went to Peru, Indiana, Grissom Air Force Base to clean things up. And then she went into recruiting. Yeah, then she went into recruiting. Anyway, yeah, every place she went, she was cleaning something up. Some jerk of a hospital administrator who thought they could just boss doctors around. Doctors don't like to be bossed around, so didn't work. It may be difficult for women to achieve leadership positions. Look at Donald Trump's comments and reactions to the candidacy of Carly Fiorina. Actually, that was in the 2016 election. He was able to marginalize her by attacking her looks, her voice, and her platform as pitter patter. And of course, we'll see what goes on with Donald Trump this time. He seems to be a little distracted with all of his indictments. Many people see good leaders as having agentic traits. Independent, aggressive, assertive, and competent. Women are stereotyped as having communal traits, friendly, unselfish, and expressive. Women are in a double bind as leaders. They are warm and communal, and they are perceived as having low leadership potential. And if they are agentic and forceful, they are often perceived negatively for not acting like a woman should. In 2014, only 24 of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies were women, and the boards of directors of U.S. companies included only 17% women. Things are not much different elsewhere. 17% figure is actually among the highest in the world, except for Europe. Norway, 41%, Sweden, 27%, Finland, 27%, United Kingdom, 21%, and France, 18%. If a woman's style of leadership is stereotypically masculine in that she is autocratic, bossy, and task-oriented, she is evaluated more negatively than men who have the same style. This is especially true if men are doing the evaluating, of course. Another danger that women leaders face, because women are perceived as being more communal, they're often thought to be better at managing crises, particularly ones that involve interpersonal problems such as a conflict between high-level managers. That might seem like a good thing, trusting women leaders to solve problems, but it has a downside in which women are more likely to be put in precarious, high-risk positions where it is difficult to succeed. Michelle Ryan and her colleagues have called being put in a crisis management roles dealing with interpersonal problems as a glass cliff. Even when women have broken through the glass ceiling into top leadership positions, they're more likely than men to be put in charge of units that are in crisis and in which the risk of failure is high. In 2014, Mary Barra became the first female CEO of a major global automaker, in this case, General Motors. Within months, she had to announce plans for General Motors to recall over 11 million cars due to defective design components that the company had known about for nearly 10 years. Could Barra become another example of a woman who broke through a glass ceiling only to find herself on a glass cliff? And I'm not exactly sure if she is still the CEO. Let's look her up. Maybe. Barra. General Motors. Online General Motors. Mary Barra is an American businesswoman who has been in the chair. General Motors. She's the first female CEO. It looks like she's still there. Okay, way to go, Mary Barra. Okay, she's still in charge. She's survived 10 years. That's pretty good. Where is it? There it is. Okay. Looking at leadership around the world, researchers have discovered that different cultures seek different attributes to their managers. Autonomous leadership, where the workers are independent of superiors and the leader stays distant from the workers, is popular in Europe, but not South and Central American countries. But there was universal agreement about the value of two leadership qualities: charisma and being team-oriented. Questions about cultural differences in leadership are receiving increasing attention because in a global economic work, groups are becoming more diverse and managers from different cultures have increasingly frequent contact. A social dilemma, okay, that's leadership. We're going to go into social dilemma. A social dilemma is a conflict in which the most beneficial action for an individual, if chosen by most people, will have harmful effects on everyone. What is best for an individual is not always best for the group as a whole. Consider a publishing venture by the novelist Stephen King. He wrote 2 installments of a novel called The Plant and posted them on the internet, asking readers to pay $1 per installment. The deal he offered was simple. If at least 75% of the people who downloaded the installments paid the fee, he would keep writing and posting new installments. If fewer than 75% of the people paid, he would stop writing and the people would never get the rest of the novel. King had devised a classic social dilemma, a conflict in which most beneficial action for an individual will, if chosen by most people, be harmful to everyone. So if people stole it, if more than 75% of people read it without paying for it, now we got a problem. It was to any individual's financial advantage to download King's novel free of charge and let other people pay. However, if too many people took this approach, everyone would lose because King said he would stop writing the novel. At first, people acted for the good of all. More than 75% paid for the first installment. As with many social dilemmas, however, people eventually acted in their own self-interest to the detriment of all. The number of people who paid for their later installments dropped below 75%, and King stopped posting new ones, saying on his website that the novel is on hiatus. Prisoner's dilemma. Okay, so another form of social dilemma is the prisoner's dilemma. A man and his girlfriend are arrested with 5 pounds of cocaine in their possession. They are separated. The prosecutor knows that if he can get one of them to turn, they can charge the other one with possession with the intent to distribute and they will get 25 years. Otherwise, it is a 5 years in probation for both for possession. Now, actually, I ran into this same situation. I had a student that was almost exactly the same scenario, except it wasn't quite 5 pounds of cocaine. Her and her boyfriend got caught with more crystal meth than they were going to use themselves. And so they wanted to charge them with intent to distribute. And so that was a question. And they separated them. This was in Great Falls, Montana. So they separated them, and guess what happened next? The person who testifies against their significant other will be charged with misdemeanor possession and get probation. So the question is, who blinks first, the man or his girlfriend? And that was the other question that my student had. Who was going to blink first? Was he going to drop a dime on her, or was she going to drop a dime on him, or would they both go to prison for a couple of years? She had 2 kids. One of them was his, I think. So what happens? The Prisoner's Dilemma was originally developed by Flood and Drescher at Rand in 1950 as some of the original games in the game theory scenario. The concept was later revised by Taylor in 1992. So you ask yourself what happened. Well, what happened in the case of my student was that she said that she would never snitch. She would never snitch. She would never snitch. It's not good to snitch. Well, he did. He snitched on her, and she went to jail for 5 years, and he got probation, even though she had 2 kids. She got out in 2 years for good behavior, but she was in jail for 2 years. Now, the interesting thing was that I came in contact with her after she had gone to prison and after she had come out. And we had this conversation. Should you have testified against him? And she said, I would never snitch on somebody. Of course, he did. And I asked her about that. How do you feel about your boyfriend who snitched on you? And she didn't have a whole lot to say about it. But she would never snitch. But she didn't condemn him for doing it. That was the weird part. I figured she would tell me what kind of a horrible person he was, but she didn't do it. Okay. Okay, so this is the Wall Street game. Two players, they can pick option X or option Y. If you both pick X, you both win $3. If you both pick Y, you both lose $1. If you pick X and your friend picks Y, you lose $6 and your friend wins $6. If you pick Y and your friend picks X, you win $6 and your friend loses $6. People are more likely to adopt a cooperative strategy of playing the game with a friend, expecting to interact with their partner in the future. Changing name from Wall Street Game to the Community Game increased the percentage of people who cooperated from 33% to 71% in one study. Okay, so if you both pick, wait a minute, if you both pick X. So if you just keep picking X, then probably you're going to win. You're going to keep winning $3. But if one of you picks Y and the other one picks X, then they get $6 and you lose $6. All right. So cooperation was common. Uh, Not so much if you didn't know the guy, but you know. Okay. So the wise guy will pick Y every time. No, I guess not. Tit for tat strategy is the meaning of encouraging cooperation by at first acting cooperatively, but then always responding the way your opponent did, cooperatively or competitively, on the previous trial. The analogy to the arms race would be to match not only any military buildup made by an unfriendly nation, but also any conciliatory gesture such as a ban on nuclear testing. And this is actually what we were living through in the during the Cold War. This is why the Cold War was a Cold War. Every time the Russians built a new bomb, we built a new bomb. Every time we built a new bomb, they built a new bomb. And so we were building bombs to the tune of destroying the world several times over. That's how many nuclear weapons there were out there. So the test ban treaty, and we were testing we had to test the weapons. We couldn't just, yeah, anyway, eventually we convinced each other that we weren't going to make any more bombs. And we stopped making bombs, which made a lot of sense. That's one of the reasons it's easier when it's just two people. If now you're dealing with India's got the bomb and Pakistan has the bomb and England's got it and France has got it and all of these different nations have nuclear weapons. Now you got to negotiate with everybody. And that's one of the reasons why we don't want Iran to have nuclear capability, because they might just bomb Israel. They might just bomb Israel for because they don't like Jewish people. In the 1960s, game theory was still predicting reactions to the Cold War. Deutsch and Krauss in 1960 and then in 1962 demonstrated that threats were not an effective means of reducing conflict. They developed a game of conflict called the trucking game. The results of the studies showed that when there was an equal reaction to a threat, the threatened side would retaliate against threats in kind, making it a no-win situation. And that's what was going on with nuclear weapons. Cooperation was the only way to win. And that's what we determined by playing all of these games. In the trucking game, players earn money by driving from one point to another as quickly as possible. As in the image below, the shortest route in their game required crossing a one-lane road, but both companies could not use this road at the same time. When the players were given gates they could use to restrict the other players' use of the one-lane road, both companies made even less money. In the initial Deutsch and Krauss trucking game, the two sides could not communicate with each other. They ran another version of the study where participants were required to communicate. And the results, there were reduced losses, somewhat in the unilateral threat condition, but it failed to increase cooperation in the other two conditions. Despite the fact that they could talk to each other, it didn't reduce the cooperation. It didn't increase the cooperation. Communication in the trucking studies did not foster trust. And that's what was going on with the Soviet Union and the United States. We had a red phone going on between the two of us so that we wouldn't make a mistake and start nuclear war. But we weren't really cooperating. The problem with the communication in the trucking studies is that it did not foster trust. In fact, people used the intercom to threaten each other. And that's exactly what happened with the United States and the Soviet Union. Negotiation is a form of communication between opposing sides in a conflict in which offers and counteroffers are made, and a solution occurs only when both parties agree. And this is what was going on. We don't have a Speaker of the House right now. You know, I told you that before. We don't have a Speaker of the House right now. Maybe by the time you look at this video, we will have one, but right now we don't have one. And what happened before, Kevin McCarthy wanted to be the Speaker of the House, and he negotiated all of this stuff. And one of the things he negotiated was that one member of the House of Representatives, if they didn't like what he did, could tell him to step down. And that's exactly what happened. Matt Gaetz didn't like the fact that McCarthy had negotiated with the Democrats to fund the government, and he told him that he had to step down. So he did. That was what he had agreed on. And now we don't have a speaker, and it looks like we might not have a speaker for a while. An integrative solution is a solution to a conflict whereby parties make trade-offs on issues according to their different interests. Each side concedes the most on issues that are unimportant to it, but important to the other side, and usually that's the way it works. Unfortunately, of course, Congress is so polarized that you can't negotiate with the other side. People often find it difficult to identify integrative solutions. People will tend to distrust proposals made by the other side and to overlook interests that they have in common. When negotiating, integrative solutions are often available. Work on gaining trust and communicating. Remember, people often construe situations differently. Neutral mediators often help solve labor disputes, legal battles, and divorce proceedings by recognizing that there are mutually agreeable solutions to a conflict. And that is the end of the lecture. So there you go. Sorry I talked about politics so much. It turns out that I have a master's degree in international relations, and I've got about 120 hours of political science. So that's another area of my interest. So I'll talk to you guys next week. I don't know what we're tackling next week, but it won't be groups.